I'm Rudman by Sussex. I'm acting director for the ILCS. ILCS is one of the 3 institutes that have been hosting IP fellows this year. Catherine Harlow is just coming in. She is.
In my calendar, I had this was starting at 2, not 1:30. So
well, that's because we had lunch. So.
Okay.
It is just.
Yeah, that's sorry. Anyway, we'll stop interrupt.
So Catherine, as director of ICS, of Classical Studies, and Claire Lees of the IES, and I have been able to support this round of IP fellowships, and it was really an amazing journey. I think I really enjoyed being part of this. So just to make sure everybody's in the same sheet here. So IPE stands for Inclusion, Participation, and Engagement. And the idea of these fellowships is that they are available for early career researchers, so people who have been working on their own, on their PhD, and have been concentrating on academic excellence, but really looking at the academic work on their own, and now really want to take the next step to see how this can apply, how this can be applied in the real world, how we can draw in other people to collaborate with and to make the project go out. Well, you will see this afternoon that there are wonderful ways of doing that and completely different ways of doing that. And so this is what the showcase is about, is to show what the fellows have done, but also you will see, I think, how close some of them are. So even though they are in method quite different, I think the impetus behind them is quite similar, and that's made for a very cohesive group of fellows who have been supporting each other in a really lovely way. Okay, so I will stop talking here. Just to say and this is something that I would like to ask you to tell everybody. We've opened the call for the next round, and the deadline is the 19th of June, so that's quite a tight deadline. In the next round, we won't just be the 3 institutes that have been doing it this year, but Institute of Commonwealth Studies is also joining us. So spread the word, it would be great to see lots of applications. Okay, so this afternoon we're going to hear the 5 presentations. Everyone has been asked to speak for 10 minutes. That should allow us time to have 1 or 2 questions after each presentation. We'll have a break in the middle and then a longer discussion at the end. And we'll start straight away with the first fellow. So that's Charlotte Rudman. She did her PhD at King's College, London, finished in 2022. Her PhD was entitled Listening to Dreams, Sound in Chaucer's Dream Vision Poetry. And for her IPE fellowship, she built on that and pursued her interest in Chaucer and was interested in exposing the connections between Chaucer's time and now through photographic documentation. Charlotte.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me today. So let me start. What can contemporary photography say about the Middle Ages? What kind of medieval survives in the history of photograph in London? These questions underline my current project, Capturing Medieval London, Framing and Perspective. This project examines and uncovers the remaining material fragments of medieval London by engaging with the city through the viewing perspective of the photographer. Capturing Medieval London asks how the medieval city has been and continues to be framed and viewed, but it also examines a range of photographic documentation associated with key medieval sites. Susan Sontag, in her seminal text on photography, writes that the act of photography transforms the present into the past and the past into pastness. Alongside this, Sontag also suggests that it is photography and a camera which is commonly regarded as an instrument for knowing things. When capturing an image of a medieval site, we frame and transform that present into the past as we reflect on the multitemporality of the remains. The project then argues that the photograph, as an archival document, as an output of a practice, as a concept, can illuminate the way medieval place reveals its layers, its impressions, not only through its contemporary framing for audiences or viewers, but precisely through its multitemporality. Very briefly today, I'm going to give an overview of my project, then move into one of my case studies, Chaucer's Monument, which resides in Poets' Corner in Westminster Abbey. I will then finish with a brief selection of my related engagement, inclusion, and participation activities. In capturing medieval London, I'm focusing on a number of key medieval sites as case studies. These include Westminster Abbey, the George Inn and the Royal Oak, Aldgate, St Paul's Cathedral, and the Savoy. This is less a study of how such historical sites are survivals, and more an examination of how these places interact with the temporally stratified city that consists and the consistent onlookers that surround them. Medieval sites are famed for audiences in the present, but they also impress themselves on us from beneath or alongside other buildings. Sometimes they materialize as we look anew, and at other times, certain medieval sites, like Aldgate, for example, are invisible, existing as presences that emerge as we walk around where they were once likely to have been. This materialization gives us a way to question how we view these medieval sites, the processes of photographic development and of emerging camera technologies, including stereographs and pigment printing, might also offer us comparative critical concepts and materials for speaking to the way medieval places are layered with and through time. Chaucer's tomb. The monument was erected in 1556 at the bequest of Nicholas Bingham. It sits in the south transept of Westminster Abbey, an area known as Poets' Corner. It has been captured by a camera since the inception of technology. The images you see now were taken last year with my iPhone and exist solely in the cloud. In my phone, Chaucer's remains are digital. In their presentation to you today, I'm actively contributing to the perpetuation of this site. For as Carolyn Dinshaw states, each present now is stretched out and spanned by a past now and a future now. The perpetual medieval is captured through the photographing of medieval remains such as Chaucer's tomb, a continually aging monument of the past. Through my archival research in both London and the US, I have discovered that Chaucer's tomb exists in various forms of photographic material remains. What I found is an inventory that at once preserves and disrupts the accepted histories of this tomb. We have a media of remains. There are multiple technologies at play in the preceding images, with a timeline ranging from 1860 to the present day. On this slide here, you can see three of the earliest images of Chaucer's tomb. One from 1896, maybe. One from 1896 by A.W. Ellison, which is a reproduction print that has been mounted. One 1896 printed book image of a glass lantern slide by S.B. Bolas, and the last a 1928 stereograph by Keystone View and Underwood, all of which were printed in by and for the US market. Here you can see a glass plate lantern slide from the Dabbs collection of the London and Middlesex Archaeological Society from 1910. And from Anthony Kirsten's archive held in the Courtauld, a print from a negative from 1939. And the final image is this spotlight high drama image from Jim Dyson of Getty Images from his published book, Dead Famous London, in 2012. Photographs as material objects exist in their own time and in their own space, documenting multiple histories beyond that of the image that is being captured, interweaving narratives of photographer, image, object, camera. This means that there are also remains of another kind, the remains of past perception of the Middle Ages. In this context, Chaucer's tomb becomes a placeholder for the medieval, where reading the images of the tomb documents the changing perceptions of the Middle Ages as recorded in photography. The tomb is a placeholder for recording time and for showcasing technologies. For example, the images from the US were likely captured for a tourist and for education purposes. to bring London into the American home. Thurston's image, captured in the outbreak of World War II, just before the Blitz, allows us to peer at a time just before the original stained glass window above the tomb was destroyed. Dyson's Dead Famous London was published during a time when London was humming in the glow of Olympics, capitalising on dead plus famous plus London, an active attempt to capture London's history in the moments before it recapitulated. So what can contemporary photographic practice reveal about the ways the medieval past survives in the modern city? Might it allow us to capture the way the Middle Ages exists both a visible and invisible presence through London? And might photographic histories reveal more recent histories of viewing and documenting the Middle Ages? These questions were the basis for my walking trail that sought to uncover and rediscover the medieval remains of London. The trail was not a history walk per se, nor was it a local tour. Instead, it was a collaborative conversation about layered time, and one that was carried out on the move. It asked participants, ranging from photographers and medievalists to artists, and those with keen interest in London history, to think with perspective and offer perspective by using their cameras to document the invisible remains of medieval London. And here is a short film of that.
Thank you so much for coming on this photo trail, capturing medieval London. It's a conversation about a layered time. It's about thinking together with different perspectives on perspective. So what point or what perspective are we perceiving these sites that we travel on today? And how are we accessing the past? What do we lose? But what can we capture? What do we miss in taking pictures? And can we capture something that was not previously there? I would invite you to think critically, to think aesthetically, and to think creatively about your practice and about the London landmarks that we explore today. At each site, I'll provide a tiny bit of history just to set the scene, and again with some questions, but I really want you to think with your camera. So, with that in mind, welcome to St. Giles Refugee. I want to think about the ideas of repair. Okay? What you can see here, and what you'll be able to touch, if you couldn't touch before, is actually the old London wall. So you've got the Roman brick, you've got the Roman stone. What's also interesting is it's underneath the seal of London, which is what you get up there, which was created in 1381, one of the most turbulent times in the Middle Ages. By the tower. This theme for this one is think about assemblage, think about collage, kind of how history is housed, how do we capture it? Try and go down to the crypt, capture something that has summed up your experience on this entire friendship day.
This trail resulted in an online exhibition, of which I will share in a moment, where I asked participants to send 4 or 5 images that encapsulated their response to the questions asked throughout the walk. Questions such as, how can we use the camera, use modern technology to position ourselves as spectators to the Middle Ages? How do we capture fragments and reveal new narratives of these sites? As you can see, many participants captured the temporal layers of London's history by creating collages of the medieval, a medieval that is either hidden or emerging out of much more contemporary architecture. What emerges in this new archive of photographs is an overlaying of the medieval on the modern, but also a medieval that is always asking us to look at it from different perspectives and to think with it by being in proximity to its surviving material. This was collaborative work. Some participants captured the in-between, the pathways between each stop, emphasising movement between the past and the present and across the invisible lines of the old London Wall, for example, or the invisible time flows of Thames. Ask me later, you can see a link to the website, so just so I'm first up, I don't want to take it. So what has photography got to do with the Middle Ages? As Sarah Slarley states, there is an infinite number of medieval Londons, their frames of visibility continually shifting. The camera, of course, offers one way of framing and shifting visibility, while photography, its process, its own history and its byproducts, provides methods for a creative, critical engagement with medieval places. To the photographic remains of Chaucer's tomb, through time, to a collaborative piece of photography for photographing key medieval sites, this fellowship has moved me from individual research to collaborative practice and back again. The interests of the project going forward lie in the implications and ramifications of combining studies of photography of medieval sites with contemporary practice. As the work itself moves throughout the city, the past and the present collide in the digital space too. And so I'll leave you with this question. If photography is the act of mediating between the past and the present, what kind of medieval image can we make without cameras?
Thank you very much, Helen. And as you were saying, I think in the pictures it became really clear how often people did the layering of the times. Really fascinating.
Without too much prompting.
Yeah. Okay. Do we have an immediate question for Charlotte?
I'm curious about precisely that question of prompting. I want to know how you matched theme and question to site when you were setting up the walking trail.
Yeah, so I do actually have a whole list that I did. So each site that I did had a kind of overview prompt. So St Giles of Cripplegate was layers, the city wall in St Alfred Gardens was repair, the Tower of St Elson's Spittal was remains, the Guildhall was reuse, Cheapside was sound, St Paul's Cathedral was perspective, Thames Path and the Queenside Dock mosaic was making, London Bridge and St Magnus the Martyr Church was recreations, and All Hallows by the Tower was collage and assembly. So each of them informed the questions I was asking within that. But I have to say, my overview project was informed by me creating this trail, because those themes feeded directly into this kind of unending archive research that I'd come across and needed to find a route through. So the website, just to go, the online exhibition, which you can see if you go at the IES, I've put a blog up that's kind of detailed about the exhibition itself. And then at the bottom of that, you can go into the link which takes you into the exhibition where there's more information on the trail.
I feel there's, at every stage of what you showed us, there's so much more that could be explored. I was wondering about the photographs that you had of the Chaucer Memorial, because when you look at these different pictures, there isn't that much you can do. You can't overlay, you can't collage, whatever. But the difference of including the other poets to having a more intimate, it's just so different, isn't it? So already there you can see the interpretations.
In my longer thinking of this, especially with Chaucer's monument, as you said about in my bio at the beginning, I've been studying Chaucer for 10 years, and for me, I actually visited this site kind of when I received my PhD as a kind of ritual, almost like performance, almost like just to go, I did it, I actually managed it. So I think, but I didn't quite realise how much photography was part of that process. which led me to kind of find these kind of other versions. I mean, the ones, although they're Westminster Library Abbey, both of those are in an American context, so they're actually, and this stereograph is amazing because if I was able to see it, it would make it 3D. So I think there's that kind of tangible, experiential need within this space.
Brilliant. Thank you so much,
No worries.
Charlotte. I will be able to come back to everyone and ask more questions. Great. So we welcome our second fellow, Helen, Helen King, received her PhD from Newcastle University, and her thesis explored the work and archive of children's author Beverly Naidu. Is that pronounced correctly? And again, she built on her PhD and on her previous research into refugee narratives in children's books. And then she partnered up with Tyneside Primary Schools. And her project is really the question, how can children become active participants in literary research into refugee narratives? Helen.
Yeah, so thank you so much. I'm really excited to show you a lot of artwork made by a lot of children today, and I'm also going to read to you. So this is a bit of a different one. So this was this idea, how can children become active participants in literary research into refugee narratives, is the kind of maybe slightly over-ambitious question of my time on this fellowship. And I've used the fellowship to follow up on a project that I was part of a year ago, which was asking how do we tell refugee stories for children, and this came out of my PhD research. And I worked with 7 Stories, which is the National Centre for Children's Books in Newcastle, and with the Western Refugee Service, which is a prominent refugee charity in Newcastle. And we brought together, myself with an illustrator and a writer, we brought together a group of refugees and asylum seekers living locally, and we developed a children's book together. And this was a kind of prompting question of that project. How do we tell refugee stories for children, both in the archive and for those with immediate personal experience of seeking sanctuary? And my partner on the project, Lily Cruiser, who's an illustrator, this is one of her drawings of one of our work in progress sessions where we hashed out some of our ideas. That project and this is prompted by a couple of driving ideas. The first one is from Justina Deszczowczak, who is a scholar of childhood studies, and she uses participatory research with children to inform literary criticism. And she argues that if children's literature is to serve a constructive role in promoting young people's rights, then it's necessary on the part of children's literature scholars to combine literary criticism with participatory research methodologies. And this project is kind of the beginning for me of starting to approach the combination of those two things. And then secondly, the work of Julia Hope is really influential for me in her use of refugee stories in the classroom, and her the importance that she sees for refugee picture books in promoting empathy, in, as she says here, exposing stereotypes and media myths, and the importance of first-hand narratives. And so this again was an impetus for me. So I'm going to read to you. So this is New Home. I brought a bunch of copies with me today, which I will not be taking back with me on the train to Newcastle. Please take one if you want one. There's a QR code next to them, which if you wish to, you can use to donate to the Western Refugee Service to support their work. I'm not selling the books because I received funding from Newcastle University to print them all last year, but if you wish to give a donation, you can. But I'm going to read it to you. And this is a way of replicating what would happen in the classroom, because I've been taking this book into classrooms, in schools, in Newcastle, to generate responses from the children. So this is New Home. My name is Joseph, and this is my sister Marion. It was dangerous in our home country. One day, someone called Dad and said we have to leave to be safe. We travelled a long way, a long, long way. We travelled with cars, we got on trucks, we walked through mountains, we also got on a boat. Finally, we got to England. Dad took us to our new home. The house has yellow walls and small windows and a garden. Mum said, "It is safe now." It is colder in our new home. Mum knitted scarves for both of us. They made us warm. Dad says we have to go to school. We were happy to wear our scarves, and we felt our mum with us. The school was big, very big. There were lots of other children, and we felt small. After break, I couldn't find my scarf. We couldn't tell the teacher she doesn't understand our language. We were sad when we returned home. Mum hugged us when we told her. The next day at school, a boy called Jacob found the scarf. We made a friend. We went on a school trip. Me and my sister have made new friends. We had a nice time at the beach. We flew a kite with our friends in our new home. That's the end. So there is a huge amount I could go into about the process behind making that, which I don't really have time to, but I would welcome any questions on it. But what I would like to talk about now is the classroom work that this has generated. So I've been into several schools around Newcastle, most of whom I recruited to the project through Newcastle Schools of Sanctuary Network, which is developed to support schools that have a certain number of refugees and asylum seekers in the school. So I would read to them, as I've just done. We would have a classroom discussion, and that would be quite free form. Lots of different things came out of it. And then each child in the class would get a fabric square and some fabric pens and be invited to respond to this question. What would you like to show or tell these characters if they were to come into your classroom, if you were to meet them? And I've taken the fabric squares, photographed all of them, so I now have this archive of their responses, and then they've been sewn together to make scarves like this one. So it's very long. Please come and take a look at it later, because it's a gorgeous object. And this is just one example of the several that have been produced on the project. So I'd love to show some examples of what these responses have been. So what would you like to show or tell these characters? Football. Football. If you need to know one thing about living in Newcastle, is this. I've disappointed a lot of children when they realise I don't really watch football. Like, who's your favourite player? What team do you support now? I need to start preparing an answer to that question. Lots of messages of welcome. So we've got this, one of the schools produced one of the children reproduced the school logo. And you've got some more text-based ones, so a series of welcoming messages here. How to navigate the school, how to navigate lessons. That's what this one's meant to be on the right. This one on the left is really interesting. I had a conversation with this child and she explained that her and her family had in the past done this thing where they give prayer mats to new Muslim refugee families in the community, and so she drew herself, a picture of herself doing that for the characters in the story. Let's be friends. Everyone's the same language. It's okay not to know. We've got some language teaching happening. A lot of the children would say, like, I would help them learn English if they didn't know English. And then in one class in particular, one child suggested they were going to do the Angel of the North. And so we got quite a lot of Angels of the North. I think about a third of them produced different variations of the Angel of the North. And so this is just one of them. Yeah, the iron book film. We got some personal interests, so some of the children just wanted to say, this is some stuff I like. Picture of a cat. Great. I love it. I'm not sure where it came from, but I love it. And then this is an anime that this child loves, and they wanted to say, do you also like this? And if not, let me tell you about it. And what's your favourite food? We'd had a conversation in our discussion time about food and how food can be a way of getting to know other cultures and new people and making people feel welcome. And then we've got some reflections on the story itself. So this could be an illustration of the family on their trip by boat to England. We've got a child here searching through piles of scarves to find their lost scarf. We've got a kind of storyboard retelling of the story here, with a scene of war and then scenes of travel and then a scene of arrival in a new school. So tentatively, I want to suggest some impacts of this project. So for schools, I've received feedback from teachers that it's been a really valuable resource for their classes, to have copies of the book to use, but also to have the discussion generated in class, to have an opportunity for empathy and solidarity. And for me, I'm really interested to think about the scholarly applications of this, not to just see this as an engagement output, but also to ask how can this feed back onto my research into children's books and into child-produced materials. And so I have a few tentative ways in which that could be done. As I say, this was my ambitious starting question, and I'd originally wanted to produce these outputs, this artwork, and then have another group of children who would analyse it with me. And that's really beyond the scope of this fellowship, but it's something I'd still like to do. But just on my own, I've just wanted to draw out for us now a few themes that I'm noticing. So the first thing that it's been really interesting in a lot of discussions that I've had with children is authorship. Children are really keen to know who wrote this, why, is it real, is it a true story, is it fictional? How do you write a book? They've been amazed when we've explained that the youngest people in the group were 7 and 9 years old, so about the same age as a lot of the children who I've been speaking to in the classroom, right up to the oldest participants were in their 50s and 60s. I had a really exciting discussion in one class, which is very pertinent for the field in which I work in childhood studies, about who should write stories like this. Some of the children seem to believe some of the children expressed that it doesn't make sense to try and write a story about seeking asylum if you haven't done so yourself, whereas other children in the class thought you should be able to, and they had a bit of a debate about that in the class, so that was very interesting. The second thing is about process. So again, the children were really interested in all the classes to know about the process of making a book, and I think that's important for me for a few reasons, partly because for children to see themselves as creators and potential authors, a demystification of the process of bookmaking is really important. But also I like to see the way that they're intervening in the process of generating stories and engaging with the authors of the book. So this one on the left here was a message that this child wanted to give to the authors of the book, so saying, thank you for putting this amazing story together. I am sorry for the trouble you went through. And this illustration is meant to represent fear. So it's this sort of mechanical fear bot monster thing, which I thought was very cool and very interesting when we're thinking about how children's interpretations of the creative process and interpretations of the literature that they engage with. And then this child has kind of replicated the picture from the book, but also then asked who made the front of the book. So the front page of the book was a kind of was a collaborative effort using Photoshop to compile a lot of different images, and they were very interested in how that was made and the significance of that kind of collaborative work. And finally, I've called this very grandiose way intertextuality, but I'm thinking about this idea that is important in children's lit about how children's creative outputs are often generated by the kind of found stuff of culture and of literature and of the books that they read. Like it is for all of us really, our outputs are informed by the things that we absorb, the creative things that we engage with. So this one on the left, this child had written All Are Welcome, and that is the title of a book that they had read in class together, which is kind of a celebration of diversity. And this child had used that to create this message of welcome for their children. So using the classroom reading to inform the way that they relate to others with empathy, but also the way that they create their own media. And this one I really like, is there a light at the end of a tunnel? So it might be a statement, it might be a question, and again it's this like found phrase of the light at the end of the tunnel that is kind of present in our culture, and using this to maybe address themselves, maybe to address their peers, maybe to address the characters in the book. And this was also interesting because this was actually a different child's idea. They talked about it together. The child whose idea it was originally had rejected it, and this child had been like, oh, well, I'll make it if you don't want to make it. And so there was a bit of collaboration happening there. So that's me. This is the website of Lily, who I collaborated with on the project. The digital version of the book that I showed you you can access that here on this link, and I can also send it round. And yeah, some references. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I mean, the material is amazing, but also I think your extra questions of, how does that feed back into the research? I'd like to hear more about it. But are there any other immediate questions? Well, maybe then a short answer to that. How are you going to use this in your research? I mean, yes. Mainly, we're coming back to the question that Charlotte had about prompts. How do you ensure that the children are not too influenced by prompts?
I think I accept that they always will be influenced by prompts, and actually being in the classroom and knowing the context is really important. Mm-hmm. I think there's this idea that I was very confronted with when I first started studying children's books and child-produced materials in archives. Be like, what is the child's voice, like unmediated? And it doesn't exist. In the same way that it doesn't really exist for us as adults. Like, we're presenting something with a set of cues that we've been given, and if I can know what those cues are, I can say like, oh, this is how these children have responded in this specific context, and drawing on that context and engaging with it with agency. But at the same time trying to make these prompts as open as possible. So not saying, I want you to do a message of welcome, I want you to say something along these specific lines, to try and just see what emerges.
I'm really interested in the scarves. And I'm just wondering, was that part of the project design from the outset, or is that something that arose once you started doing workshops?
That
and who made them? Because they're beautifully done.
Yeah, so I'm saying some of them, but Lily, my partner on the project, who's a professional artist, so this one. So not the nicest.
My grandmother was a tailor, and she was.
It's gorgeous. Yeah, it's great work.
Was it? I mean, is that something that's because obviously Greg scarves in the story, and I assume that's partly why. But was it designed from the start, or was it?
It was actually so. When I was planning the workshops, I spoke with the person who coordinates the Schools of Sanctuary network in Newcastle, and we bounced a lot of ideas off each other. And she said, "Oh, it'd be great if we could use the scarf in some kind of way. Can they make a scarf in class?" And so. Okay, that's how I came up with the idea of combining the things together.
So did they know when you gave them the fabric squares that it was going to kind of...
Yes, and I had like a kind of rough example to show them before.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Okay, we move on to our third fellow. So that's Kevin. Welcome, Kevin. Kevin Amoke did his PhD on post-colonial African literatures, and in particular on the themes of migration and sex work. He finished his PhD at Lancaster University in 2023. And again, his IP project very much builds on his PhD. And his aim was to explore how asylum seekers, particularly those held in refugee centers, refugee facilities, so how asylum seekers envision, construct, and embody the world around them through the texts they produce. And the project is entitled Interludes, Refugee Worlding in Postcolonial Literatures and Life Writing.
Yeah, thank you very much, and welcome everyone who is here today. Yeah, this work actually is some form of an extension of my PhD. The issue is I've read novels on migration, and I've done my PhD on African migration novels. I started asking myself, writers have talked so much about migrants and have even interviewed them. And one of the novels I used on Black Sister Street was written after an interview. The author interviewed migrants, illegal migrants, sex workers, and then turned it into a text. Then I know that a lot of agency, a lot of individuality is lost when you try to midwife the individuals into a text. I started asking myself, what does it mean, or how could we get refugees and asylum seekers to be part of the literary research that we do? So in order to answer that question, I decided to look at 3 categories of texts. One is the conventional novel stuff. The other one is autobiographical texts, texts written by refugee survivors. And the third one are texts by refugees and asylum seekers who are currently living in the UK, who are most of them living in hotels, who are still being battling government and settlement issues. So that's it. That's the key thing. So the challenge now is how to get texts from asylum seekers. The novels are there, the autobiographies are there, but how do we get access to refugee and asylum seekers? So that's it. Now, for a bit of context, what I will do now is I'll show you just a few videos. Maybe I may stop them midway if we don't have time. So immigration is something that's always in the news, and
this small village in England is divided, as dozens of asylum seekers have been moved into a local hotel.
It's turning us into racist people, which I don't want to be racist, but it's making me dislike these people.
These poor people that have gone through hell need somewhere to go to.
Some villages have been holding protests. One turned violent, and a local man was charged after a police officer was injured. What do you think the village needs saving from?
Just 250 strangers that we don't know anything about.
Kegworth is a sleepy village.
Sorry about that. I was trying to.
Most people know each other. It's a very small community.
Kegworth is great. So it's a really nice community spirit.
From sleepy to strife, a community in conflict. This village on the edge of Leicestershire, population 3,500, has found itself bitterly divided over the arrival of around 100 new residents.
They've been dropped in a village where there's literally nothing to do. things have changed completely, and it has caused a divide in the village.
Guys have come from war-torn countries. They want to feel safe and welcomed and contribute to the community.
This is what caused the clashes. There aren't many facilities in Kegworth, but the U Lodge was one of them. It's a family-run hotel with a gym, a pool and a popular restaurant. But last month, without much notice, all bookings were suddenly cancelled and all the signs to the hotel were covered over because the owner had signed an exclusive contract with the Home Office to use the hotel for asylum seekers. And its local communities feeling the fallout. This is Operation U Lodge, a campaign group that's been holding regular demos.
Yeah, okay, thank you. That's about that one. And sorry, I've got a couple of things open here. I need to manage that. Yeah. So, that's a small village that has a number of people sent to them without any notice, and you can see how the violent community is. Some think that, well, we can't welcome these people, we don't know them from Adam, we don't know who they are. Others say, well, we can, let's give them the opportunity. And this is the kind of thing we see immigration, and especially forced migration, keeps bringing this kind of argument up every now and then.
This is the reason why I canceled my doorbell camera subscription. This brand new
Asylum seekers are packing up and moving out. This is one of the 50 hotels the government said it would close to migrants to save taxpayers' money. It pledged to move them to cheaper types of accommodation like the Bibi Stockholm barge. But we found out that's not what's happening. Instead, in many places, they're simply being taken to other hotels.
What's happening right now? Where are these men going? These guys are moving from this hotel to another hotel, a bit further up north.
We watched as they left Kidderminster in taxis, then arrived 70 miles away at this hotel in Derbyshire, where they'll now be staying.
What we've just witnessed will mean the Home Office can say another migrant hotel has been closed. But as we've seen, the migrants will still be being housed in a hotel at the taxpayers' expense, just a different hotel, an hour and a half away from where they were staying.
For Khan, it means losing his college place as it's too far to travel. He had expected to be out of taxpayer-funded accommodation by now. As he's been here so long, his claim is part of the so-called legacy backlog the government says it's dealt with.
Around 2 years I'm here. I want to work. I want to start a new life for us.
Halo's been in the UK even longer. The hotel where he was staying closed to migrants last week. So he was moved 40 miles away to this hotel in Staffordshire with a group of men.
Switching, so it doesn't change anything. Just wasting money, I think.
So why do you think you've been moved?
I think just because of the next election. So they want to tell the native people we sorted out the hotels.
Children lost school places when this hotel suddenly closed to migrants.
Okay, thank you. So that's about that. Now, you see, I try to project this to make you see, how the divisive the arguments on the immigration and forced migration and illegal migrants or asylum seeker could be. Whether it is that there are so many issues intertwined in it, politics, ideologies, and that. Now, immigration wins the vote, and politicians play with that a lot. So, but then it comes at a particular time in the political, maybe, for instance, as we are now, the elections are very close by. So, politicians will always hack on that at this point in time. So, what I want to show actually is also about my field experience. I tried to get approval for ethical approval for this research. Fortunately, I didn't because the program itself is very short. And one of the things I discovered is the gap between the ethical approval itself, that is what the academic approval for doing this kind of research, and then the kind of thing also that exists in the field. So one of the seminars I attended, the suggestion was, well, Kevin, you're not going to get material from these people because you're not using the right approach. So what do? Well, you've got to pin them down to get information you need. Now, coming from a post-colonial background, I know also that pinning them down comes with some kind of power. But I also know that the one I try to pin down has some kind of agency and will resist my pinning him down. And that resistance could be in the form of giving me the kind of story I want. So that's one thing. Then another thing I discovered is that the refugee networks or associations that try to help refugees also have their own interest in refugee organizations. Is that there's some kind of political economy associated with networks like that, because they also have a job. If you don't have refugees, you don't have asylum seekers, these charities may not exist. So they also try to protect their job. And in the course of doing that, they have produced texts that actually I could use for my research. But I also discovered that those texts produced do not necessarily reflect the life and the experiences of refugees themselves. So in other words, there is something associated with it that also has to do with silencing the order, even when you try to project this order. So these two approaches or these two perspectives make me think about something else. How do we get into refugee research, involving refugees in the kind of research we do? What is wrong with the approaches we were using? So what I did, some of the ideas that came to my mind, and that's why I've got this. So for some of you who are familiar with African literature, especially with the novels of Tsymbalyuk, this is the Colonels. So Achebe talks about the Colonels so much in his novels. And that is because the Colonel has a very central place in Igbo worldview. Well, I am Igbo, maybe that's why I've chosen that too. So, could a different approach to refugee research help decolonize ethics or our ethical approach to research in general? And if that is possible, could decolonize be one of such ways of doing that? In one of Achebe's novels, things fall the most popular, we have this: he who brings color brings life. And then, how significant is color in the Igbo worldview? If I want to interact with you as someone from the Igbo extraction, the first thing I do when I come to your house or when you come to my house, the first thing I do is to offer you this. And this is not just a piece of fruit. This has every element of sacredness within it, every element of friendship, community, commitment. So if I break a coconut, I eat a coconut with you because I welcome you. I don't eat a coconut with my enemy. That's part of what we see in most of our novels. So the idea is that the coconut creates a bond. Not only a bond, it creates a commitment and it creates some kind of trust. So there's something I think that is missing in the ethical approach to refugee research. One of the main thing is, what does a text mean? We'll try to get consent from the population we're researching. What does it mean for us to present to them a written text? What I think is missing is that the colonial mindset, which we bring into research, tends to undermine or tends to maybe somehow does not really bring into perspective what the text means to the author. And in the post-colonial context, a written text has power much more than the spoken word that you have in colonial. They have different kinds of power. The written text of the colonial administrator, as we had in the olden days, and as we still have, the written text is it's got a kind of power that subdues the other. And that is why, to many African people in my culture, if there is a written summon from anybody, somebody brings a text and says, please, can you sign this? Nobody will sign it because, from experience, people who have signed texts either ended up in police custody or signed away the fortunes of the community. So, in that case, going into the field with a written text and asking people, yeah, this is what I'm going to do. Can you sign to give me consent? I discovered that nobody was doing that. And I started asking myself, would it be possible to decolonize ethics in order to have more space for interaction with people that with the colonial research? Thank you very much. I'm going to break the colonial back.
Thank you so much, Kevin. That was a very, very thoughtful, very powerful reminder that we need to think more about how we do research. Yeah,
thank you. That's very kind, Catherine. So this has been such a pleasure to be part of this fellowship and meeting all the fellows too. It's been a real camaraderie experience, and especially discussing all of our projects with the excellent support that we've had from the directors. So I guess this project was a wild idea. I explore race and ethnicity in the ancient world, particularly in the Greek and Roman novels. And it's a combination, I suppose, of my academic background, but also my public engagement background in working with minoritized communities and putting together some public engagement activities and knowledge exchange projects and doing various heritage projects and so forth. So when this opportunity came, I was just absolutely, sort of really wanting to be part of that. So I guess the essence that is that I really wanted to get back in touch with my own heritage and ancestry, and thinking of creating a space where people like myself could feel a sense of value as someone who is from a sort of child refugee background, wanted to give voices to refugees and asylum seekers, which has been spoken about with a few fellows here, and to perhaps try and counter this really detoxifying narrative around refugees and asylum seekers. So this is just a reflection, just a kind of a window into how I've used the fellowship to explore some of the ideas that I had, but also bringing together things that I've worked with other collaborators, other projects, including Histories at Risk Network, which explores endangered heritage, endangered histories. I ran a project with them with endangered histories in Eritrea, which was, in a sense, quite sort of, avoiding the politically charged sort of undertone of it. And then also been contributing to the Black Voices Myth project with Actors of Dying Races, which Catherine and the School of Advanced Studies has been involved in. So it's just trying to bring together all these different threads to try and think, really, where do we go from here? So the plan was, I don't know if I stuck to the plan, but I have this really great imaginative idea that it's going to be X number of workshops over this time, and this is going to be the outputs, etc. Because that was my kind of research services, knowledge exchange, kind of impact, sort of professional service coming at it from that angle. And so then I thought, okay, well, the workshop should be online to give accessibility to everyone. So spanning out from not just London, not just UK, but internationally, because the diaspora is everywhere. And then to think about, okay, well, actually, I do want some sort of in-person activity, hands-on experience. So that's when we had an in-person event, which was a third workshop. And these are my absolutely wonderful contributors who are at that kind of, I suppose, there is a terminology in social science called boundary crossers. So people who are, one foot in academia and the other foot in the kind of world of public engagement and storytelling and so forth, but also being from multiple identities. So these are the contributors that have made these workshops possible, but also bringing their own experiences of what it's like to belong to the Eritrean communities, or to be a kind of scholar that is, sort of in multiple disciplines and working outside academia and so forth. So I was incredibly privileged to have these people here who can be the facilitators like myself. I was really pleased that Sarah Singer from the Refugee Law Initiative was involved in this project too, because she just gave this really wonderful current political overview of the real challenges of Ethiopians and Eritreans who are from a refugee and asylum seeker backgrounds. And I guess I was also wanting to bring in the perspectives of writers who were also academics, so like Professor Darya Gash, who is Professor of English and African Literature, but he also writes novels, and also Eyob Darillo, who is an absolute world expert on Ethiopian and Eritrean medieval manuscripts in particular. So what I wanted to do was just to bring different perspectives, whether it's male, female, black, white, and bring them together and to talk about, okay, how can we look at sort of these classical stories of forced migration and exile and centering blackness in a current world of just, sort of anti-blackness and anti-refugee rhetoric. So one of the things was to try and contextualize what Ethiopia meant. And the thing that I really wanted to do was to not erase places like modern Sudan, Egypt, and various other, Somalia or Djibouti, as well as Ethiopia and Eritrea, and to try and really think, okay, well, giving context, this is beyond the Ethiopian Eritrean communities. It's actually speaking to a lot of different communities within the Northeast Africa and the Horn of Africa, and trying to bring some sort of, examination of what classical geography is and the fact that, the borders that we have today are so artificial, but also the kind of fluidity of geographical places, which we now tend to forget because these borders are so fixed in point and in time and place as well. So in a sense, this was, trying to contextualize what Ethiopia meant in the ancient world, but also what that means in the modern world. So this is our kind of starting premise. And then really thinking also how the modern, Ethiopian and Eritrean communities have thought about some of these myths and how they've reinterpreted them and, sort of taking claim to that African myths. And the final workshop included Eob Darillo giving an online talk on amulets and charms, which was one of the sort of strands that came up our discussion of one of the characters in an ancient novel called Chariclea, who was born white from an Ethiopian background, and she had charms and amulets that were an identifier of her heritage, of her Ethiopian heritage. And so what this really did was spark some debates about, sort of, right, these are, sort of amulets and charms that have meant so much to sort of ancient and medieval and modern Ethiopians and Eritreans that has some relevancy to the Greek and Roman novels too. And then we looked at the kind of intersection of trade and culture with the Islamic influences and trying to contextualize this kind of fluidity of identity, this fluidity of ethnicity, and this kind of, actually, you're spanning across, sort of different ethnic groups and the influences of external cultures like Islam, as well as, sort of the geographical boundaries constantly shifting too. So it was really interesting to have Eob Darillo, sort of presenting and getting that kind of responses from the audiences, and then going to the British Museum, seeing some of the collections there. Now, of course, the all-important feedback. What did your audience participants think about these things? And I guess one way, I thought of doing this was obviously the kind of feedback forms. I really wanted to capture something that was a bit more fluid than that. So I've had, sort of interviews over Zoom, but also kind of in-person feedback from different people. But this is how significant even a very, sort of time limited project with the 3 workshops over a very limited, as I said, sort of months, can actually create some of these responses, where you have people who felt like this was generating a space to talk about things that aren't just about the classical world, but what is going on in the current world. And that's been the real kind of nugget, is to try and, see what was the effect, what was the impact on these participants who were engaging at different points during these different projects. So there is a sense of, trying to kind of reclaim that heritage, reclaim, sort of forgotten histories, forgotten identities, using the classical Black voices. This is a young history graduate who's incredibly articulate. I was never this articulate when I was an undergraduate. But she kind of encapsulates the feelings of when I was talking to young people who attended that event. We had 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, but also their families who really wanted them to know more beyond, sort of Eritrean heritage and culture that is so wrapped up in endless war narratives. And this was an opportunity to really touch upon all the different sort of significant heritage that we shared with others from the Northeast Africa, to try and bring them to the fore so that they have a sense of community that isn't just about war. Generally. So I think she encapsulates, how she was feeling, but also the fact of the importance of these type of workshops that gives a platform, the voices to the voiceless in some ways, but also this thirst and hunger for the younger generation to seek new horizons that isn't about conflict and so forth. And this is 2 feedbacks from the contributors, from Rudman and Awet, who is an Eritrean archaeologist, and as I said, Rudman is he's an Eritrean scholar in Ohio University, and this is what it felt for them being involved in the project, and this was incredibly, I suppose it's kind of poignant, but gratifying in some ways that we were using these characters. I mean, they're fictionalized characters, but they meant so much to these participants. So the output, sorry, this is getting a bit more technical. Well, you know, I put together some curated bibliography that participants would be interested in and expanding that, which is a kind of fluid document. We have the wonderful Josh Craven with us today, who is the artist behind the reimagining Chariclea and Memnon and Andromeda, who I'm incredibly grateful for. And we'll be writing a blog piece which includes the artist process, because this was a new field for you too, wasn't it? It was an adventure for Josh, who is normally early modern historian, who knows, who does art too, and tapping into the process of exploration, of trying to look at the clothing, the textiles, bringing together all the different heritage, ethnicity of ancient, medieval and modern people, and reimagining them in a really creative way. And thinking about, okay, well, you know, so once I get the time to write up this, where it might lead to, where the publication might lead to. So a couple of ideas I had is the History Workshop online piece, which I've been in communication with. Also the Classics in and Out of Academia, which seems like a really good fit for this kind of project. And again, just thinking about the sort of what it means to see figures from history that are so much like, you know, sort of representing the communities of today, and the kind of process that Josh went, I'm so sorry, to try and, I suppose, to give authenticity, right? Authenticity, but also to see how modern communities will feel about that representation. And this came out during the last workshop, wasn't it? Which I thought, this is so powerful, the power of myths to talk about modern issues. And sadly, this person passed away before the film was made. But it's an Ethiopian fellow who spent most of his life translating Greek and Roman mythology into Amharic, into the Ethiopian language, Amharic, at the detriment of his own lifestyle and family, etc. And it just tells you the kind of power of these myths, you know, the kind of why they matter, and to the point of where this person will put his current life on hold to reconnect with the fundamental nature of why humans have these stories and why they matter. So, reflections. I wish there was more time. 5 months is not enough. So, you know, I wish there was a much more time frame, especially, you know, with Kevin, when we were talking about the ethical process. There were certain things that I couldn't do because of the ethical process. So I resorted back to my public engagement experiences, which is to run public engagement activities, not to be interviewing to immediate refugees and asylum seekers, because that would be re-traumatizing them. So in a sense, I was interviewing second generation, or those who came in the first wave and the second wave of the migration, refugee migration timeline. I wish I had more time to involve the Sudanese community, because that was the one thing that I wanted to do from the beginning. And as I said, you know, I don't want to be erasing any ethnic group or identity or, you know, sort of heritage. So I think it's really, we share a common heritage with Sudan, you know, as well as Somali communities, as well as Djibouti communities. So that is my kind of greatest regret in some ways, but I just did not have the time, because I was using all of my networks, and that was, you know, just within the Ethiopian Eritrean networks. And I wish I had, you know, to further workshops to do. So one of the workshop ideas was to use food as an experience to talk about the themes. And unfortunately, there's no time for it. And also, I really wanted a poster exhibition in the School of Advanced Study. I'm hoping at some point this might be possible. So, who knows? Because I think visually I want to do a bit more work around the images that Josh has created and a response piece from audience participants responding to that. That would be amazing. And I wish that I had a kind of greater collaboration with, say, the Migration Museum and the Museum of Colour and various other networks I haven't explored, but I'm incredibly grateful for the networks that have come forward, just, serendipitously, like the Professional Eritrean platform, which is full of really energized young people who, want to do more with their tapping into their heritage past. So if you want some feedback, there is someone here who is present from, who's been involved in that process, so someone like Josh. But I just wanted to thank you for giving me the opportunity to really just have something that is very personal to me, but also to share that with the rest of the world.
Very much, May. We've got time probably for one or two quick questions. Annie, would you like to come and fiddle with the Zoom link while we do? May, can I ask you about what you said about challenges of engaging with Sudanese diaspora communities? Because, you said you use your own networks to the max, and it might speak to this question that was going through your presentation about political division versus kind of shared origin. Mm-hmm. So how did you manage to connect with the communities you connected with, and what were the challenges?
Well, with the Ethiopian Eritrean communities, just because I did so much work leading up to that, with my past roles in Oxford and other locations. So there was already a kind of network, I guess, but also having those collaborators like yourself and Awet, the Eritrean scholars who work in, one works in Exeter and one works in the Open University. It was really great to constantly bounce stuff with them, and they were tapped into the Ethiopian Eritrean diaspora. And I kind of wanted to not ignore the political tensions, but I didn't want it to overtake what was really talking about shared past. So in some ways, it's talking about the past is so much easier than it is talking about the present. And that gave me the opportunity to talk about things that were a common theme amongst all of us. There was Sauerwit from the German Institute who talked about anti-blackness amongst Africans. And the way that gender plays, and so that was really refreshing. There was some. We didn't record any of the workshops because I wanted it to be a safe space. If someone had a political view, whatever, yeah, sure, express them, But there was some really candid and really poignant experiences shared in those workshops, and there is no way of extracting that and putting it in some documentation like what Helen was suggesting, because that presents a problem in itself. What you want to create is this really inclusive space where you can put aside your political tensions and recognise that people are people, and they've suffered a great injustice and they've suffered hardship, like with the conscript, for example, the description, and Professor Dilmay was talking about it from his experience and his father's experience, and I don't think having that recorded would have had the same openness and frankness.
Yeah, there's a lot of themes between Helen's and Kevin's and and the comments that you made, and Kevin to say I love the idea of some kind of position paper on decolonising research ethics procedures.
Yeah.
You know, I think that would be a wonderful output of this year's fellowship cohort. Yeah. Anyone got a further question? Do we have Darya here? Hi Darya, can you hear us?
Hello, yes.
Oh, excellent. Sounds like the microphones are picking up. How are you doing and where are you joining us from?
I'm in Bucharest, in Romania, on a kind of a similar fellowship actually. It's also 5 months. Yeah, it's nice here. It's really nice. The city is amazing. I really recommend everything.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you for dialing in to give your presentation. If you're ready, I'll just give you a very short introduction and then hand over to you.
Thank you. I really wish I could be with all of you today. Yeah.
So Darya was our final. Okay, I'll ignore what Annie's doing. I'll just say, very glad to introduce Darya Tsymbalyuk, who is our final presenter, who is a researcher, also an artist and a writer. I think you got your PhD in 2021, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
But obviously had a long, already had a developed practice before the award of the PhD, working in participatory research, public engagement, creative projects, crafting, art, and with a particular interest in environmental humanities, and recently also a particular interest and concern with the environmental impacts of the war in Ukraine, which was partly the focus of your project. So over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I said I wish I was there but in person, and just wanted to thank as well for this opportunity that I had to be part of this fellowship and to do this fellowship and to get to know my colleagues. Actually, I just wish as always, you wish to have more time with amazing people in your training. I'll just share my screen. I'll share the presentation. So yeah, I started the fellowship after 3 months being in Ukraine on fieldwork, but also just being home. And so I started in October, started working on this book manuscript, which is under contract with Quality, and it's of course for general audiences, which is also quite a challenge. For me, I've written shorter pieces for media, but also essays, kind of more creative prose pieces, but it's a challenge to kind of tell to large audiences about the war. And like during this fellowship, mostly I've been trying to navigate how to write about it, how to balance the kind of the research that I've done on the ground, but also the desk research that I've done, so environmental reports, the very kind of dry language, also through studying media pieces. This majority of the like most news that we have is usually from journalistic investigations, because the access to a lot of things is not available for scholars on the ground, including environmentalists, to actually obtain data. So it's been kind of a balancing act, trying to figure out how to write. And I just submitted actually on the 1st of May, the first draft, so it's under review at the moment. It's been a bit of a wild journey at many levels. And it's supposed to forthcome in 2025. We'll see. Anyway, so this is the blurb that they publish. And I agreed on. The title now is Ecocide in Ukraine, the environmental cost of Russia's war. I can't say I'm fully happy with the title, but all of this is going to be a process of negotiation, and I'm also learning of like how to, I guess, work across different demands and visions. And so the book is under 60,000 words. It contains 6 chapters. Water, Zemlya, which we'll be talking about. Now, in a bit more detail, air, plants, produce energy. I've written during my fellowship this School of Aesthetics. I've written 4 of these chapters, the ones highlighted in yellow. And I've kind of provided here a little bit of like the subheadings that they have inside. And the kind of stories that I cover, which would be from, of course, the Kakhovka flooding that followed the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam in the south of Ukraine, features in many prominently. I try to engage with research on endangered and endangered species. I write about landmines a lot. I write about contamination of water. So there's really like a really broad range of things. And what I was interested in as well, and I thought that what can my perspective bring in, like 2 things. Of course, that I'm writing not as an outsider, but somebody who is, while being abroad, still very much connected to things on the ground. And this is for me not just kind of case study picked, but it's destruction of home. So I really wanted to bring in my voice there, but also as a person trained in modern languages and cultural studies, I engage a lot with images, broadly speaking, imaginaries, the way we understand things. And I was interested in kind of writing the way war really changes our like meanings of things, usual things, including like air and like what do those things mean, and how this means are then represented. Whether in visual or in written works, and while like, they're not the main focus, but they're kind of woven alongside facts and analysis of those facts. And I thought maybe I just read a short excerpt. Is it would be okay?
Sure. Yeah.
So this is from this chapter. It is chapter 2, chapter which is called Tsymbalyuk. I said like. This is all quite fragmentary, the like, short pieces, and I'm gonna read the opening and then I'm gonna read the kind of the ending of it. So I'll start with the opening. And maybe here you will also see the way kind of Ukrainian words come in that also, for which I also blame in my modern languages training, I think. Okay. At times of war, soil holds deeply existential questions. In much the same way as Russian explosives disfigure objects into bent, melt and burnt amorphous shapes, the war works meanings. Thus meanings of the words soil, land, ground become meshed together. They become multiple by echoing each other, and still each separate word fails to communicate what that something more than land, soil, ground is. And here I really, for me, it's a challenge also to kind of how to think without falling into the nationalist reductions attached to land or to ground, but not to devalue the kind of what is that more that land holds and why people refuse to live it. As Katerina Bodanova points out, the word Zemlya, which you see on the screen, in Ukrainian manages to grasp the complexity and the embroidered meanings better, whereas Zemlya indicates land and soil. When capitalized, it further signifies the planet Earth. In Ukrainian, there is also a word grunt, which carries scientific and agricultural understandings of soil, as is reflected in the name of soil science, which is Postcolonial. Zemlya, therefore, feels like the word Zemlya, therefore, that doesn't feel only more colloquial, more domestic and familiar. It also contains multiplicity of its meanings, and that's why I use it throughout the book. It kind of feels like this rough, so it feels like the rough worms of hands with black grains of soil under the fingernails, the exhaustion of a long summer day, and the back pain from tending the vegetable patch. Zemlya is also a ground under our feet, literally and metaphorically. It supports all our networks of life. Being on the ground in English means being somewhere where things are taking place, being inside the situation. Being on the ground means having different knowledge, different experience of the war, and different probabilities of being killed. Being on the ground in Ukraine for many means living in the trenches, in Zemlya, and in this chapter I also write a lot about trenches. Being far away from Ukraine during the war means constantly thinking about those on the ground. It means being constantly aware of the kind of Zemlya one is on and how much death or safety each Zemlya might contain. Time operates differently, space operates differently, depending on whether one is inside or outside, depending on which Zemlya one is standing on. Living through a war, one cannot escape thinking about Tsymbalyuk all the time. In Ukraine, Tsymbalyuk has long been associated with life and death. Tsymbalyuk roded, farmers say, and Tsymbalyuk gives birth. Traditionally, bodies of the deceased are buried in Tsymbalyuk. Tsymbalyuk is also what you hear referred to in many Ukrainian churches as the earthly, this earthly world, the world full of earthly sorrows, in opposition to Nebo, the skies, in Ukrainian, that holds life eternal. Indeed, Tsymbalyuk is where people live in suffering and passion. Tsymbalyuk is where they die, to zemlya życia, the earthly life. In times of war, Tsymbalyuk holds life and death intimately, closer. Being on Ukrainian Tsymbalyuk today means being potentially closer to death. It means being under attack. The danger differs across the country. In some parts of which Tsymbalyuk holds so much death that stepping on it might be fatal. And then, anyway, the chapter goes into looking at the grain question, and Ukraine as a breadbasket. It also looks at landmines and the problem with them. It looks at trenches and the way they impact environment, but also the architecture of survival that crisscrosses the country, and then end with trying after looking trenches and also at the practices of burial, including discovered mass burial sites, and that is attached to understanding like what land contains these days, which is like rows of cemeteries. I'm kind of trying to bring it back into it as a world, the ground as a living space. And this is referring to the previous section, but says in the Garden of Trenches, Ulevich talks about animals that populate the southern steppes. And I write a lot in the book about this ecosystem of steppes, which is just like vast grasslands. Here listed the example. So animals that populate the southern steppes, such as mice, and the unusual experience of seeing them through an infrared camera on the front line. Seeing, quote, the hot clots of life, end quote. Tsymbalyuk is a place of life and death inhabited by mice, marmots, earthworms, plant roots, and soldiers. Since the Ukrainian armed forces deoccupied the northern oblasts, most confrontations take place in the steppe regions of the country. To Josef Pachowski, a Polish botanist, and one of the most prominent scholars of the flora of Kherson Oblast in the south of Ukraine, he's attributed the coining of the popular metaphor of the steppe being a forest upside down, because everything happens on the ground in the steppe. This metaphor implies that the thickness of life in the steppe occurs in the ground and under Tsymbalyuk. It is this rich underground geological life of the steppe, with its preservation and decomposition of organic matter, that created humus. You got me. Tsymbalyuk rich in humus is known as chernozem, or black soil, which has been turned into one of Ukraine's most important resources, used to produce grain, vegetables, and fruits. And this relates to this breadbasket discussion. The war affects the life of chernozem, or black soil, and all other soils. A report installed by et al. Indicates that TNT negatively impacts the soil microbiome. High concentrations of hydrocarbons poison earthworms. I tried to read more about earthworms, but there is hardly anything else I managed to find on these creatures who, being the living pulse of Tsymbalyuk, are making roots for water and oxygen. I keep wondering and thinking of soil as inhabited by earthworms and other animals. Tsymbalyuk is a web of life. Examining the impacts of the war on biodiversity, Igor Zhorodnyuk and Denis Vyshnetsky note that the trenches serve as traps for many animals, such as hedgehogs and hares. For example, one of the widely circulated videos from the front line documents a marbled polecat. Ilana Boroguznia listed in Ukraine's Red Book of Endangered Species, who was found trapped in a trench. You can see a still from this video. Zaharodnyuk and Vyshnetsky also comment on the rise of mice populations in the war-impacted areas, which has been caused by the abandonment of agricultural fields. Mice are part of the frontline life, living in every corner of trenches, including UAVs and clothes, destroying food supplies, technology, and for humans carrying the risk of spreading diseases. Not all rodent species, however, are witnessing an increase in population. Some had been listed as endangered species before the war, while the ban on hunting and the desertion of territories by people might have resulted in the increase of populations of some burrowing animals. Many Others have been put in greater danger. As with other changes, we cannot know for certain, as no environmental research is possible in the war-impacted territories. Mikhail Rusin, a senior researcher at the Schmalhausen Institute of Zoology, has examined the impact of Russia's war on small mammals. The survival of many animals, such as brown squirrels and bobak marmots, is dependent on the grazing of cattle. While mines do not directly affect these rodents, people using severely mined territories for grazing, which in turn changes the habitats for brown squirrels and bobak marmots. At the same time, the habitats of some other small mammals might have been totally destroyed, as is the case with the many places flooded after the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam. For example, among the endangered species studied by Rusin is Norman's birch mouse, and I will show it. If you have fear of mice, please don't look. Realize maybe some people, but it looks like who is endemic to the steppes of Ukraine. According to 67 the world, the lower Dnipro region, flooded and severely damaged to the Kakhovka disaster. Measured by human standards, Norman's birch mouse is a small creature who easily fits into a human hand and whose tail is longer than its body. The tail helps it to balance as the mouse jumps and climbs. When the sky deepens to uncover the glimmer of stars, Norman's birch mouse is out and about, moving swiftly through the darkness. It likes sandy soils and unplowed grasslands, which means that for decades its world has been shrinking, destroyed by monocultural fields. In winter, Norman's birch mouse is hibernating, warmed by the spiders, butterflies, and beetles it caught through the summer and autumn. That is how life had been until in spring 2022. Norman's birch mouse emerged from winter hibernation to a world where many of the places it used to live in had now been occupied by Russians. Military vehicles and explosions became a new feature of the already cruel and disappearing world, yet on the 6th of June 2023, big water came and crushed the little pockets of life inhabited by Norman's birch mouse. After the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam, many expressed concerns that the habitats of Norman's birch mouse might have been totally destroyed. The impacted territories remained occupied and inaccessible to enable Ukrainian conservationists to assess the situation. In summer 2023, Norman's birch mouse unexpectedly emerged somewhere else. Mikhail Rusin found a previously unknown population in Mykolaiv Oblast on the territory of the Ilamen Steppe Nature Reserve. I learned about it as I visited the reserve in early August. As I moved through the reserve, I ended up constantly kneeling on the ground to be able to see a plant bed that was water bottle with a flower. I find myself constantly growing to Zemlya. I also visit the House of Nature, a magnificent, dilapidated building with a massive plaster wall picturing evolution and featuring an octopus, a jellyfish, a spider, a bear, an eagle, and many other animals. Helen Andromeda, whom you can see in the central photo, the director of the reserve, is fighting to preserve and renovate the building and dreaming of turning it into a research center for the restoration of the steppes, which, just like the plaster wall, are populated by many different species, including Norman's birch mouse. There is hope that with the need to cultivate contaminated lands, the hard work and knowledge of environmentalists will be better recognized and supported. At night, as I go outside to get some fresh air before sleep, I look up at the steppe skies of the open reserve. I watch them wondering what danger they hold amidst the stars. Mykolaiv Oblast constantly witnesses trajectories of missiles and drones. As I'm trying to read the starry sky, somewhere there in the steppe, a Norman's birch mouse might have also come out into the night. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Darya. And yeah, thank you for reading us some of the book. It's really fantastic to hear some of the writing, having heard about you writing the book. I have a question actually to kick us off, which is I wonder about you spent a lot of time explaining, bringing the reader through the connotations of Zemlya. And I wondered about what the choices you make are in relation to language and your writing practice, because obviously you have a number of languages at your disposal. And I wondered how you're handling it in this book. And the choice here is principally to write in English, which I assume is not just about sort of publishing, commercial publishing considerations. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's just, I think it actually, like, coming from other languages, what kind of gives me this, right, this need to insert other languages into, like, not to have monolingual because I was also working with my PhD. Like, actually, in the case of Tsymbalyuk, like, the editors, the publisher, like, they asked me to, like, substitute it with land or so, something that would be legible to an English-speaking reader. But anyway, this we managed to preserve. But for me, I mean, I'm writing about the place, and the language allows you, the language also quite often forms in response to the place, to naming circumstances which are absent, or different meanings sprout out. And so for me, in instances when I think it's intuitive. I mean, of course, all truth is intuitive, but I just I feel that to be able to experience the space, even in English language, you need some of these words, such as Tsymbalyuk. The other one I rely on, and I think we read another excerpt I shared with all of you, is Leman, which is a kind of estuary, but it's an ecotone where the sea meets the rivers, and it's a kind of change in ecosystem. And I use the Ukrainian word Leman because it holds so much, even if, even if people with knowledge of Ukrainian or with similar Slavic language would read, I feel like it would communicate to them. But I think for me, like, introducing these words also means kind of locating people in this particular space. Yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else got a question for Darya or a response? Helen.
Yes, I've got a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, totally.
The owl is whizzing.
Oh. Oh, okay, yeah. My question is about the, I guess I'm interested about the mixture of, like, the mix of nature writing and you're bringing in a scientific perspectives with memoir and with that, like, autoethnographic approach, which is, when we've talked about this before, that's a genre, like, I guess a subgenre of nature writing that I really love. But I wonder if you, like, what were maybe the challenges of that, or maybe some reflections on that, on balancing those different elements of the writing?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I feel very anxious about the whole manuscript. Like, that's the, I feel I really, I think it's a very uncomfortable space to be in. So I'm on this process of the noise from the wind. So yeah, like I feel like unstable, differently when I write. Like in a kind of more conventional academic mode, in a way that structure provides more confidence to me, at least. This way, I constantly feel like, oh my God, like maybe also like the data is probably super dry and boring or obvious, and then the other parts are very sentimental and just really, really like a memoir, and it doesn't hold together. Yeah, to be honest, it just makes me. I don't know if this is a good answer, but I think it made me quite vulnerable and insecure. But my view, I know, like I read a lot of data, but sometimes I think like it's probably also comes from my frustration with data that, like, when you see these animals just mentioned, like I don't know anything about them, right? Like this name doesn't tell me anything. It doesn't tell anything to like 99.5 people in Ukraine. I've never seen these are very endangered species, and in a way, it doesn't speak. And so I really wanted to kind of pull out almost some of these elements and like to really think, what does it mean? How does this animal look like, right? Like where does it live? What does like daylight? And also, I feel like with the environmental writing academically. There is, I mean, we look at analysis, of course, but there is sometimes like my frustration with my own writing as well, that I also like just mention these things, but my focus is like, you can do things in creative writing that you cannot do in academic writing. Like you can describe a tree for a long time, right? That is not possible in an academic writing. But by that, like, I really wanted to give presence to these animals and plants, so they're not just mentioned, but they really populate the text in a way. So that was kind of my thinking to like do it, but I don't know if like if I manage, to be honest. But it's kind of intuitive and it's a balancing act. We'll see. I sent the book to be read by some friends, and then the reviewers are looking at it, and I'm like, oh.
So we caught you at the worst possible time to present. But congratulations on submitting the manuscript 3 weeks ago. Well done on that. I mean, I think this question of sort of attending to agents, but also subjects, so subjects of agency and subjects of suffering in different scenarios is something that's threaded through all of the projects this year. So trying to find new ways of, trying to attend to things or people that are not standardly attended to, developing innovative and creative ways of doing that, and then working out, well, how do I do this? And then some of the kind of struggles against particular kind of structures, whether it's through research ethics approval or the form of writing that might go with this, trying to find sort of new methods that are appropriate to that. When I think about last year's cohort of IPU fellows, I think there's more, I guess we're beginning to find in the school, because the beginning of the scheme was thinking, well, we really need to work on inclusive and participatory and community-based research, but we were very aware that the expertise for that doesn't necessarily sit in an academic institution like this. So this has been a way of beginning a conversation, but I think this is something that's kind of emerging as a thread. And so I really wanted to ask you all, the fellows, how useful or important has it been to be part of a cohort? Do you think that has made, it would be terribly rude of you to say, no, it hasn't made a difference at all. But I wondered whether interacting with each other has helped you either to frame and design your projects in slightly different ways, or helped you to identify things that you would have done had you had time, because we're aware that this is a very short-term scheme. You know, whether it's given you a sense of what you might do next or in future, that you can sort of take ideas from each other. Sorry, that's not an entirely coherent way of thinking, but I hope you understand what I'm saying.
I would say for me, as someone maybe who is on the outset is an outlier project in kind of the threads that have come through, actually listening and sitting today, I think one of the key words that we all have and has been very useful is perspective, because we've all had to explain our fields and our areas and our ideas and our project in ways that if we sat in front of children's studies, or if we sat in front of ecosystem, you wouldn't need to kind of give certain contexts. Whereas I feel that having as a cohort, not only are you sharing with people who would never come into, you are also doing the inclusion bit within the cohort. You may never go to a medieval seminar, for example, and now you have to. So I think that there has been a way that we have shared perspective, but I think some of the questions that we've been asked from people who are not in our fields have then enabled us to reflect back and go, okay, well actually how do I need to look at that question? How do I need to ask that question? Because maybe that's a different way of pitching it to other people, or a way of challenging a perspective, maybe.
Darya, I see you raising.
Yeah, totally. I agree with that. I also think, like, honestly, it made me feel less lonely in a way. I don't know, I'm now like the institute I'm in is great, but it's a much more it's still interdisciplinary, but everybody is doing quite conventional things within their disciplines, right? So they all come together, but they're not many or no people who are doing kind of like pulling the research into directions that go into society in different ways, in different languages. And my experience in academia sometimes that I feel I constantly have to like put myself into a certain box to like almost like limit myself, right, in my own self-presentation because of all the different things that I'm trying to do, many of which are seen as not valuable, not hierarchically as well, and all those other things. So I think it would be really inspiring actually to see other people also trying to pull and push in different directions in their own fields and topics and different ways. And kind of like really made me like much more, I don't know, it gave me a different kind of confidence and support and also hope for the way our fields are being shaped, you know, it gives you kind of energy to keep pushing against the conventions personally. So thank you.
It's a very heartening commentary. Got name. So I guess the important thing to reiterate was the community. So in a sense, it felt that you weren't doing it on your own. You weren't alone. There were individuals who had such a diverse portfolios. So you didn't really have, in a sense, a very conventional academic. There are people with so many life experiences. And so you felt, in a sense, already part of a community, even though it's just the 5 of us, it's that sense of community. But it was also setting up the WhatsApp group. It's so simple and yet so effective. You share resources, you go through your ideas and you think, oh, what about this? Have we tried this, etc. And I think you need that kind of safe space to not be criticised or laughed at or whatever, that sometimes our academic fields tend to be hierarchical, as you said, Darya, but also a sense of, there's a sense of imposter syndrome, right? There was none of that. This is great. You also had the touch points, sort of the touch points that you had with yourselves, with the directors. I think that's crucial to just have that kind of, oh, how's things going? Or, that kind of sense of how can we help you to make the best out of this project, and out of this fellowship, which is in itself quite unique. I don't know how many institutions actually run this sort of type of fellowship. I would certainly recommend have more money to do a longer time frame, but which is brings me to my second point. I think the sort of the writing up process, etc., takes far longer than is in that time frame. There's sort of the before the scholarship, the during, and then the after scholarship. So it's trying to think, okay, the time frame for these fellowships. If you're thinking of something that is engaged practice, this takes so long to learn from, for institutions to learn from. So in a way, I think doing it in 5 months and trying to get some learnings from there. Well, one of the learnings is that you can't do things in 5 months. If you are really thinking about engaged practice, in academia, then it needs to be far longer, right? But it is really interesting just to listen to all these different projects and that kind of interdisciplinarity, the multidisciplinarity, the different perspectives, but also the commonalities. I find incredibly exciting.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we're already sort of trying to, we try to bring lessons learned from this being certainly one of the ones that we've been talking about is how we can better prepare fellows before the beginning start period, the official start period of fellowship, and what we can do even through the application process and feedback given immediately after acceptance and so on. But I would love to think further about how we can continue to support the work of fellows or networking after the end of the after the sort of formal end of the fellowship as well. I hope you have all, whether it's through particular institutes and contacts or, in the school, made some useful contacts and had, learned some
had an opportunity to kind of develop your practice, but I also hope you will stay in touch and you know think of us as a kind of collaboration space in future, because it is what the School of Advanced Study exists for. I also wanted to say that there's one person who's been absolutely key in all of this, and that's Annie. So thank you very much, Annie.